Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is my absolute pleasure to deliver the last keynote of this Congress. So thank you, Ruben, for the introduction and the invitation. And thank you to the incredible organizers, staff, and volunteers who have put together such an exciting program around what has clearly been shown to be a crucial and necessary theme in medical humanities and healthcare history. And of course, thank you, audience, for your enthusiastic engagement over the past few days. Unfortunately, my teaching schedule and the time zone difference has prevented me from attending as many sessions as I would have liked, so I am especially grateful to all of you who have been tweeting about the panels and the keynotes. It's allowed me to find a little bit of joy throughout my day. By way of an audio description, I am a South Asian woman with short curly black hair, wearing a purple blazer and a patterned purple top. I am sitting in front of a wall full of books, surrounded by plants and more books and papers. I am zooming in from my home office in Newark, Delaware, and acknowledge that this occupied land is the traditional home of the Lenni Lenape and the Nanticoke tribes, the Delaware Nation. Without them, we would not have had access to this gathering and to this dialogue. And I take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of the land and actively work to decolonize my own scholarship and teaching. Much of the discussion over the past few days, it seems, has been about reverting the invincible, to make it visible, so to speak, so we can better understand and situate it in historical and contemporary context. The discussion also revealed, I think, how invincibility can also be perceived as eraser and what it really means to make visible the invincible. And I think this becomes all the more prevalent when we think about this in terms of race, gender, disability, and especially within the nexus of class, and how our understanding of invincibility is also crucially tied to power. Power of exposing the invincible. Power of inserting one's autonomy over their invincibility. And perhaps also power of vulnerability that comes from knowing, understanding what it means to position invincibility as a discourse without trespassing it towards the visible. What we've also learned, I believe, is how much of our medical frameworks rely on exposing the invincible, identifying microorganisms as the cause of a disease, using imaging technologies to expose the hidden, and to diagnose invincible unknowns, rare diseases, or autoimmune conditions to make sense of symptoms. What I've also appreciated is how we, as scholars and as people who experience both health and unhealthy times of our lives, have sought to balance the boundaries between objective and subjective perception that come to fore within the clinical setting, and more importantly, what it means for a sick person to prove that their invincible condition actually exists, that it is real, worthy of cost and care. But also, tragically, how too many instances of invincible conditions are ignored and dismissed because they are being requested to be taken seriously by disabled people or people of color, particularly Black women. I'm here today to talk about deafness and hearing, both, I think, which can be accurately classified as an invincible auditory phenomenon on different sides of the spectrum. But my argument contextualizes more broadly the question of what it even means to have an invincible disability. We can recognize disability from its object, someone using a wheelchair, a cane, a walker, wearing glasses, a hearing aid, or prosthetics, someone walking with a limp, or making use of a medical device like an insulin pump. These technologies all clearly indicate disability in some form, and we can slowly recognize people who use these technologies as being disabled, whether or not they themselves might consider so. We are also coming to terms with recognizing the symptoms of invincible disabilities like depression, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, post consumption syndrome, and now even long term COVID 19. But as many disabled and chronically ill people will tell you, the process of making their invincible disabilities apparent within medical spaces has been a challenge, sometimes with unforeseen odds. The pandemic, for instance, has certainly changed the way we host conferences. Many of us have adjusted to a virtual Zoom world that has replaced physical lecture halls and even event stages. And while we might be frustrated by constantly socializing on screen or dealing with the fatigue from sensory overload, it is crucial to remember that these virtual events have made scholarship accessible in ways that they have not always been available, especially before the COVID pandemic. This increase in accessibility has made possible participation for disabled people that, for the most part, have been limited. But beyond captions and access copies and time zone accommodations, the virtual world has enabled some disabled people to render their visible disabilities invincible. And this opened up opportunities for them that had previously been unfathomable or denied in the past, but also gives us an opportunity to rethink what it means to live with invincible and visible disabilities. As many of you might be aware, I am deaf and I wear digital hearing aids. Captions have enabled me to conserve energy from lip reading and auditory fatigue, which allows me to understand more in virtual meetings and well as events such as conference panel. But also preserving my energy allows me to do more throughout the day. So do more writing, to do more reading, to more research preparation. Have energy that otherwise would have been expended by dealing with the physical and mental strain of in-person conversation. I am also a woman who has been diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis after years of being dismissed for my invincible pain, since most of my diagnostic tests have found me to be in the standard healthy. Endometriosis is a chronic condition that causes debilitating symptoms, which poses more challenge to my daily life than my more visible disability of deafness. For instance, I have to carefully think about the clothes I wear, because sometimes fabrics against my skin can cause extreme discomfort. So one job interview, for example, I actually wore a long blouse to cover the unzipped side zipper of my pants because after a day of intervening, the pain from my endometriosis caused my abdomen to basically bloat out, so my clothes did no longer fit. Sometimes I even sit in Zoom events with a heating pad strapped around my abdomen. So these are the ways, like you don't see this when you see me on the screen. You don't really see whether someone has a physical disability. We just have gotten so used to seeing the dressed up image of our colleagues, our friends, and our peers on screen. And in some cases, I think this participation has made our conversation much more equitable. For everything I've just described are also hidden strategies that are unseen by you and noticeable only when I choose to reveal them. It is this choice of revealing the invincible that I want to focus on today and what this means when we think about assistive technologies like hearing aids. Because hearing aids actually build upon this legacy of making the technology invincible. One Philadelphia otologist actually said in 1905, for example, that all hearing devices, when they're created, they need to be invincible but potent. So what does it mean to think about the nature of technology that is designed to be invincible, created to improve mostly an invincible disability? In the 19th century, ear trumpets were bespoke creations designed and created for mostly wealthy users who commissioned them. German manufacturer F.C. Ryan's London-based Paradise for the Deaf marked the beginning of commercialized acoustic aids that were listed in catalogs for special order or available for purchase in the shop. Most of Wayne's products were simple trumpets made of gunmetal, silver, gold, tin, or cardboard, offering various options for the consumer. The company's elaborate and ornamental designs, particularly the range of concealable aids, appealed especially to upper-class fashion, as they encapsulated the need to minimize bodily defects by disguising obvious characteristics of deafness. Visibility would remain a lasting trend in hearing aid design. Beginning with the first commercial electric hearing aid that was created in 1898 by American engineer Miller Reese Hutchinson, technological advancements in hearing aid design during the 20th century focused on improving power and amplification, shifting from carbon electric devices to vacuum tube versions that could be worn on the clothes.
I think we can overcome most of the difficulty with this autophone.
What is this funny little end for?
This is the earpiece, or receiver. Don't you remember how we took a mold of your ear? Well, this is that mold in hard rubber. You see, it fits right into your ear, like that.
And what is this big button?
That's the microphone that picks up the sounds. It's a kind of telephone transmitter. Here is the amplifier. It increases the loudness of sounds and does most of the work that your eardrums now refuse to do. It's something like a vanity case. You'll be right in style with this.
Oh, it is awfully neat, isn't it?
If you were a boy, you'd carry it in your pocket, like this.
Oh, that'll be just the thing for Uncle Harry. He promised to take me to the theater, just as soon as we were both able to hear again.
Hearing aid technology underwent a dramatic shift in the 1930s when sub-miniature vacuum tubes made it possible to combine the amplifier and microphone into a single pocket unit connected to wire ear receivers. These new models shifted from being portable devices to predominantly wearable ones. A user could now wear hearing aids on their clothes or keep them in pockets rather than carrying them in accessory bags, though most models still required separate battery packs. Known as multi-packs, these hearing aids were technologically superior to carbon versions, but users still found them frustrating. The struggle to conceal wires, coupled with poor acoustic quality and clothing noise interference, worked against the device benefits. Hearing aids, users insisted, revealed their deafness rather than concealed it. No matter how much manufacturers boasted about the latest technological advancements, including higher gain and superior microphone, they could not create a device that would allow a user to pass as hearing. Indeed, as one hearing aid user expressed, the majority of deafened people probably do not know what an automatic volume control is, nor its value in protecting the ear. In other words, it is not a good selling point. While automatic volume control is necessary for dealing with the material world where doors slam, hammers bang, and auto horns blare, technological improvements could not address a deaf person's feeling of isolation or unwillingness to wear conspicuous aids. This, of course, made it difficult to increase sales. Thus, during the late 1930s, hearing aid companies introduced new advertisements that shifted focus from technological advancement to individual responsibility to appeal to resistant consumers. Irving Chiatel, the president of the Sonotone Corporation, faced this problem by first addressing the pedagogical factors that faced the deaf and their emotional reactions of shame and inadequacy that obligated them to conceal their deafness. Not wearing a hearing aid, he claimed, was more conspicuous, for no matter how well a user concealed their aid with crafty fashioning, that strained deaf face gave away of their deafness. That deaf face was so obvious that magazines for deaf and hard of hearing people frequently featured articles advising readers on how to manage it. One especially pressing issue for the industry was that advertisements for hearing aids used language similar to that of patent medicine. Words like invincible, hidden, and concealed, which undermine the technological benefits of hearing aids by placing them in the same category as alleged or known quack cures. Removing these terms and placing them with reference to more modern phrases like individualized fitting that provided precise audiological diagnosis for hearing was the preferable strategy for personalizing a user's good hearing. Such messages became even more compelling when manufacturers combined two innovations emerging out of the Second World War, printed circuit boards and button batteries, to produce even smaller, compact models. With these advancements, the batteries, amplifier, and microphone could all be combined into a single unit, the monopack. These new technological advancements, the hearing aid industry declared, enable deaf people to follow new pathways through urban soundscapes and navigate their ways as hearing citizens. This was especially made more prevalent with the commercial availability of the transistor in 1952, which made it possible to design more powerful monopacks and then later one-piece units that were worn completely in the ear or behind the ear. Transistor hearing aids became so popular that by 1954, 97% of all hearing aids on the market were transistor model. The transistor hearing aids were not necessarily cheaper, more reliable, or always practical. They were, however, smaller. Small enough to be contained in spectacle frames, small enough to be worn behind the ear and concealed by clothing or skin color, small enough so that clothing noise was dispensed with and extra battery packs were unnecessary. And for hearing aid firms, advertising these models required emphasizing the notion that a particular lifestyle was being sold, one of better hearing through hearing happiness, so no one knows you were deaf. The smallness of size then became the cheap selling point for hearing aids, especially as units could be built into headbands hidden in the ear, pendants, tie clips, watches, fountain pens, and even jewelry. One especially prominent selling point was to emphasize glamour.
Today, although hearing aids are smaller and more efficient, the trend nevertheless is towards disguising them, as in the case of this Alice band hair clip. Statistics show that today approximately 1 woman in 10 doesn't hear as well as she should, and probably wouldn't wear a hearing aid on principle. Yet modern aids like these rhinestone earrings are often glamorous accessories that are fashionable as well as efficient. A new model that gives little or no indication of its real purpose.
Firms like Sonotone and Zenith used educational films and magazines to emphasize how uncorrected impairments of hearing prevented deaf people from enjoying their lives, drawing parallels to the acceptance of wearing spectacles to correct poor vision. Celebrities even became spokespersons for hearing aid firms, while fashion magazines showed female deaf readers how to conceal their aids through glamour to overcome the ordeal of silence. Such advertisements did more than create a fantasy to be sold. They mirrored cultural expectations for the deaf to become hearing citizens. And some marketing campaigns even avoided the use of the words deaf or hearing aids in their advertisements, believing that they were unappealing for prospective consumers. Instead, they came up with creative solutions, such as promoting the hear zone, an imaginary bubble that trapped a deaf person from their full auditory and social range. Of course, advertisers' social mirror often distorted and selected what it reflected. Some social realities hardly appeared at all. What can better hearing mean for those whose lives are unrepresented in these advertisements? Where, for instance, are the histories of non-white deaf people? We see hearing aids marketed as ebony and ivory, but we don't really see the faces of African Americans, for instance, in any of these advertisements, or at least none that I have come across from the period before the civil rights movement. And certainly, too, post-war advertisements of normality resided in defining gender roles, which were depicted through advertisers' social mirror. If wearing a hearing aid was embarrassing, uncomfortable, or an unpopular choice, they strategized it was better to sell hearing, not aids, by directly offering a solution to the cultural perceptions of unattractive gendered behavior of deafened people. For women, hearing aids could restore them to the dinner and card table. For men, they gave them effective command of work and family situations. The promotional materials don't really provide a full perspective of hearing aids though. Happy smiling faces with no wires in sight don't really reveal a realistic perspective of wearing and living with hearing aids. To inspire consumers to purchase and wear the hearing aid firms publish their own magazines showcasing stories of successful people, real people, who overcame their so-called handicap. These stories carefully crafted an image of success that was defined by hearing normally, where normal was equated with success in work, family, and leisure. In a sense, this need for participation in hearing society congealed the stigma surrounding deafness by tying it to technology and expectation of citizenship. Deafened people who declined to wear an aid or refused any kind of therapy were stigmatized not so much for being deaf, but for refusing to be hearing. We still see this process today in the form of paternalistic reprimands commonly leveled against those who refuse to be fitted for a cochlear implant or an auditory brainstem implant. That is, people who prefer to be culturally deaf instead. While watching the inauguration of President Biden, I noticed that Lady Gaga was wearing a gold earpiece with what seemed to be like a stunning leaf design. Now, I know this was her receiver that musicians tend to use, but couldn't help wonder what it would mean to redesign this into a hearing aid. Culture influences technological design. What happens then if we change our expectations, move away from boring beige or sleek medical designs, stop stigmatizing disability, and see beauty in difference? One important takeaway is that the design trend towards miniaturization never fully displays aesthetics. When hearing aid companies were improving or advancing the aesthetic features of their hearing aids, one of the things they were trying to do was actually appeal to a customer's personal fashion or style or even favorite color preferences. So what I want to do is show you some of my favorite items that I have in my personal collection of hearing aid artifacts, beginning with the 1940s, 1950s sonotone vacuum tube hearing aid that come with this kind of Art Deco clip that is used for basically wearing the hearing aid in your pocket like so, and then you have the microphone exposed. And obviously, some people would have preferred to wear it in the inside. Well, it's actually made for men, so it doesn't actually fit into my pocket. But this is one example. Another one is actually from Zenith. So Zenith would make pitch black hearing aid models like this, you can see very clearly. And again, the idea was to appeal to someone's personal style, but also in some cases it was marketed for African American people who would want to purchase something that wasn't, flesh colored. And one of my absolute favorites is actually Pearlbox, who produced a very rare rose gold transistor hearing aid with this kind of gold filament for the grill. I haven't seen many rose gold options, but in the advertisement, Pearlbox were specifically targeting women who wanted this type of style. And then one of the most popular, the most best-selling transistor hearing aid from the company Zenith was their gold Royal hearing aid. So kind of like modeled upon the same type of logo and design features that resembled their Zenith radio and later their television sets. So basically, the range of color and style that is apparent in these hearing aids indicates that designers knew aesthetics would appeal to customers. But paradoxically, the promotional and instruction booklets that accompany the hearing aid still advise users on how to best camouflage the device on their body or their clothes. Or as my friend Courtney Thompson puts it on Twitter with reference to cell phones, what's the point of one colored phone? You're going to put it in a case anyway, right? And this is something I've been thinking about when thinking about the design of hearing aids. Because since finishing my first book, Hearing Happiness, I've been researching more the relationship that users have with their hearing aids. Users regularly adjust their aids for better alignment to the body, and because of the intimate nature of these technologies, a user's tactile knowledge becomes essential for improving the device functionality, like knowing, for example, how to wear the device on your clothes so that the microphone isn't concealed or the wires don't get tangled up. Historians have outlined how tinkering served multiple purposes for users, for practical technological improvement and problem solving, as a means of self expression, and as a disruptive act that created new social communities. Design trends towards concealment and how users leverage their devices to assimilate into hearing society are only one aspect of this history of hearing aids. There's this incredibly rich and somewhat unexplored history of how users tinkered, modified, and adapted their devices to forge symbiotic relationships between their bodies and their machines. So all hearing aids were sold with maintenance booklets and outlined the technical features of their product, as well as instructed users how to troubleshoot common issues. But my research also revealed that users did their own repairs through do-it-yourself initiatives. The movement of the body, as much as the placement of the hearing aid on the body, determined how effective the instrument would be. So again, for a hearing aid to work properly, it was imperative that the microphone and receiver were not obscured, and the wires were loose enough so as not to be restricted by movement. The challenge for most users then was how to wear a device that worked effectively when it was not concealed, but at the same time was being marketed as a product to be hidden when worn. So if the aesthetic features of a hearing aid were designed to attract a consumer into buying a model that fit their personal style, then certainly why phase out these features? Why is it that when I was growing up, the only choices for my behind-the-ear hearing aid were presented to me as being flesh-colored or hair-colored, unless I wanted to upgrade for the skins that were in my favorite color or favorite pattern? In Design Niche Disability, Graham Pellin argues that the design priority for medical devices has been less about projecting a positive image than about trying not to project an image at all. Yet if spectacles have merged fashion with functionality to emerge as an accessory eyewear, then why not hearing aids? Pellin's explanation is that the hearing aid industry's preoccupation with technological development has actually sidelined design, as had the long-standing ableism against deaf people that pressured them to disguise their hearing aids. If discretion is no longer a design priority, then hearing aids could become as fashionable as eyewear, but this requires a fundamental shift in how product design is applied for medical and assistive technology. But again, when we look at the actual material history of hearing aids, we can see that aesthetics and fashion were very much important to the creation of these early mid-20th century hearing aids. So one way to think about design and tinkering is through the design model of disability that was introduced by Bess Williamson and Elizabeth Guppy in their book, Making Disability Modern. By identifying disability technologies through categories of ability, functionality, and normalcy, this model conceptualizes disability experience through function in the material, rather than static physiological pathology. With the design model, the focus is not on bodily cure or rehabilitation, but rather on the relationship between the body and the object, as well as the agency or identity that emerges from that relationship. This therefore allows us to conceptualize disability technology through the deeply contextual choices that user designers make, including how wearing a hearing aid requires users to perform distinctly gendered social conventions or even challenge these conventions. From Williamson and Guppy's design model of disability, we can begin to understand the importance of moving away from discretion to assertion and the cultural shift that occupies making deafness visible. Beginning with the sleek industrial aesthetics of digital hearing aids that were developed in the 2000s, designers have reconceptualized the shape of hearing aids, borrowing features from modern architecture, jewelry, and even automotive design. Yet the central focus is still on discretion. The chrome metal high-gloss non-hearing aid, created by Stuart Carton Design in 2008, received the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum People Design Award for its visual appeal. Yet the product description highlights that the palette of 6 colors are still designed to be virtually invincible when worn. Likewise, Swiss company Bernafons Bright was awarded a prestigious Red Dot Design Award for the reinvention of hearing instruments into a distinctive yet discreet design. Other prototypes have aimed to transform hearing aids into personalized accessories, including Elena Langer's Bejeweled hearing aid, the facet hearing aid, which is modeled after the geometrical shape of crystal, and other cool designs including ear gauges, music visualizers, and eyeglasses. These prototypes, however, are only suitable for people with mild hearing loss rather than across the auditory spectrum. Even Alice Turner's Amplify, a socially inclusive design which received rave reviews, is reliant on bone conduction technology. None of these designs that you've seen so far would fit my severe profound deafness, that is 98% loss in both ears, and for most deaf users, especially in the United States, these prototypes are expensive and often not covered by insurance. But by shifting from discretion to assertion, design becomes about reclaiming and fostering identity. Custom-made options for colored chassis or ear molds, charms and stickers for tubes, and skin covers have been available through manufacturers for users to personalize their hearing aid or cochlear implant. There are bolder approaches too. Lauren Rigulini collaborated with Telethon Speech and Hearing and jewelry designers to create high-fashion accessories for hearing aids. Ray Fontaine partnered with Embrace Hearing Aid to create interchangeable decorative ear cuffs. Deaf Metal, a Finnish company, transformed hearing devices into personalized jewelry. More recently, American deaf model Chellaman partnered with Private Policy New York to create gold-plated ear cuffs that are meant to accentuate hearing devices or cochlear implants. The collaboration was released alongside Mann's 3-minute short celebratory film, The Beauty of Being Deaf, which he conceptualizes his need to amplify deaf identity and how redefining the missionary with his art replaced the rigidity with fluidity. If we shift the perspective and examine design from a disability perspective, we can get a remarkable approach for understanding technological design, one that merges fashion and style with individual agency. We can see how merging aesthetics with functionality can be rooted not in shame or invincibility, but in pride and celebration.